Hello, and welcome to the Geotechnical Engineering Podcast. In this episode of the Geotechnical Engineering Podcast, I'll be talking with William A. Modrall, PE, a senior geotechnical project engineer from Wood. Will recently hiked the Continental Divide Trail. That is a 3,100-mile trail between the borders of Mexico and Canada. He'll be talking about his experiences during this hike and how it benefited his geotechnical engineering career. I'm your host, Jared Green, and this is the Geotechnical Engineering Podcast, a podcast focused on helping geotechnical engineers stay up to date with technical trends in the field. Before we get started here, this is a free show, and our sponsors help us to keep it free. And now I'd like to recognize our sponsor for today, that being Menard USA. Menard USA is a specialty ground improvement contractor that works nationally, providing design-build ground improvement solutions at sites with problematic soils. Menard works closely with civil, structural, and geotechnical engineers to minimize foundation costs for wide ranges of soil conditions, structure types, and loading conditions. To learn more about Menard Group USA or for help on your next project, please visit www.menardgroupusa.com. That's www.menardgroupusa.com. And with that, let's jump right into today's episode. Will, welcome to the show. How are you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you, Jared?
Excellent. Doing well. I was really looking forward to our conversation. So I'm glad that you could be here with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
No problem. So let's just start out by, if you could tell our listeners some of the insights to your career journey. If you think about where you started to where you are right now, and if you could tell us what you do on a daily basis, that would be great.
Sure. So right now I'm a senior geotechnical engineer for Wood Environment and Infrastructure. But before that, going all the way back to the beginning of my education and career, I attended the University of Louisville, JB Speed School of Engineering. That's kind of a unique program. It's a 5-year master's program. So you come out with both your bachelor's and master's and a year of co-op intern experience in 5 years. So the name of the school is named after JB Speed, but it really is a fast or a speedy program. So in my undergraduate career, I thought that I was going to head towards sort of construction management. But when I did that for my co-ops and internships, I realized that really wasn't for me. So sort of in my master's program, I refocused and really dived into geotechnical engineering. I found a really small company that would let me work part-time during my master's program. So I was applying exactly what I was learning in the classroom, and then I'd go out and be behind a drill rig or, be on a site that was getting drilled shafts installed. So I could see what I was learning in the classroom, when I was working for them part-time. I went to work for them full-time after I graduated. But with them being such a small company, they didn't really have the large infrastructure projects I was really wanting to work on. They had a lot of small commercial jobs. There was a lot of quick turnover, but that company was really good to work for because being such a small firm, you've got to wear so many hats. So I was a CMT technician out there slumping concrete with my ASCE, with my concrete level 1 testing. I was behind a drill rig when we had engineering jobs. Then I would do the lab testing myself, proctors and pushing Shelby tubes and things like that, all the way to writing the report. So I sort of would see a whole project from cradle to grave, and I really liked that, but I just wanted to do that on a much larger scale. So I left that company after working for them for 2 years. Went to go work for a much larger firm, Stantec Consulting. They're actually headquartered out of Canada, but have a strong geotechnical presence here in Kentucky. So that was a really great company to work for. Tons and tons of huge public projects, working with our KYTC, that's our local Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, doing a lot of work with TVA and other large energy groups, work with the Army Corps of Engineers, and that work took me all over the US. So that was really kind of a neat opportunity to do so much travel, working on jobs with Stantec and the Army Corps. And then as I have progressed through my engineering career, I realized that I'm a really good engineer, but I'm a great leader. And so I'm sort of trying to work my way from behind a drill rig into more project management. And so I saw this opportunity with Wood E&I come up to move to a senior position where I've got a little bit more of a leadership role and can start to mentor some young staff engineers on these types of projects.
Very nice, very nice. And when you say a lot of travel, like how often were you traveling when you're Stantec?
When I worked with Stantec, I would say that I traveled 30 to 40% of the time.
Wow.
Anywhere from Niagara Falls, New York, to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they had projects even further than that. But at that point in time, it wasn't economical for me to travel to those positions. We'd find someone in a local office to fulfill those roles for us.
Got it. And is that coming home on the weekends or coming home? You're out at a site for 2-3 weeks at a time.
Stantec worked traveling shifts in different settings. If it was a out of town trip that was further away, we would typically work 10 days on and 4 days off.
Okay.
But if it was a job that was somewhat local, you'd be home every weekend.
Okay. Got it. Now, some of our listeners that are, in school and considering job offers, a lot of times that's one of the questions, especially as a geotech, but a lot of times people say, I want to travel. So this is a way to travel. So it's good to hear. Good to hear that.
And I think you've got an opportunity there if you want it. I think you do limit yourself a little bit by telling your employer, especially in the geotechnical field, hey, I don't want to travel.
Yeah.
Because that's where you really learn a lot of your geotechnical skills is out behind a drill rig, doing these field investigations. So you do limit yourself, but if you're in a situation where you can't travel, if you've got a young family at home that you need to be with, I think that there's still plenty of career opportunities out there. You just have to be a little bit more creative.
Yeah, no, it's true. There's plenty of opportunities to do exclusive design, and there's plenty of opportunities to do exclusive field, and then there's definitely plenty of opportunities to do both. So I think those are the things that make the field very attractive when you think about geotechnical engineering. All right, cool. And I kind of wanted to ask you a different type of question compared to what I've been asking others on the show. I want to hear more about the trail hikes. And, I understand you've gone on quite a few trail hikes over the years, but I'd like to hear more about the Continental Divide Trail because I understand that hike was instrumental to the way you're doing things now and the way you're looking at things. So please tell us more about it.
Right. So I grew up in being an active participant in the Cub Scouts and then Boy Scouts of America. My scout troop was very active. We'd go on campouts at least once a month, if not twice a month. And then my cousin, when she graduated from college, she actually hiked the Long Trail in Vermont. That's about a 200-mile trail that hikes from south to north in Vermont. So she did that when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I had just joined the Cub Scouts, was really starting to love being in the woods, being outdoors. And then all of a sudden, my adult cousin went and lived in the woods, essentially on the Long Trail for a month or two. Wow. And so I just thought that was the coolest thing ever that any adult could ever do.
Yeah.
But as the years went on, my memory wasn't exactly correct. She had hiked the Long Trail, but I had falsely remembered that she had hiked the entire Appalachian Trail, which is a 2,000-mile trail from Georgia to Maine. And so I said, well, goodness, if my cousin can do it, I'm going to do it. And so her 200-mile Long Trail journey inspired me to go on a 2,000-mile Appalachian Trail journey. Nice. And from there, you're just sort of hooked. That journey took me 100 days.
Okay.
Which is a lot faster than most other people hike. So I did it in 3 months. Most people take about 6. But I did it in between my graduating with my bachelor's degree and coming back in the fall to start my master's degree. Wow. So I remember getting back to town, getting cell phone reception after I had just finished the trail and having a call having a voicemail from the dean of my civil engineering college saying, hey, I know that you had registered for these several classes, but we had to shift your schedule around because there was a class conflict. Hope that's okay. I didn't really have a choice because I had to be back in school the next day.
Yeah.
So it was a quick end and then quick transition back into college. But from there, I was just sort of hooked on these long distance hikes. There's just an aspect that you miss in your day-to-day life. You know, we live in America, the freest country in the world, but unfortunately we put so much of a schedule on ourselves, right? You know, we got to be at work at 8 a.m. We got to eat lunch from noon to 1. Then, you know, when we go home, we might have T-ball with the kids or our favorite shows on, and we got to be in front of that. And so we're so incredibly free, but then we're so restricted, but we do that to ourselves. But when you're on this trail, you're free to do whatever you want. If you want to sleep until 10 a.m., great, sleep till 10 a.m. You might only hike 5 miles that day because you slept in so much. But you know, you are the creator of your own day there. You have unlimited freedom. If you want to eat all of the food that you have for the next 4 days today, that's fine. You're going to be really full and really happy, but then you're going to be miserable the next couple of days. So just that true sense of personal freedom, just sort of getting away from the rat race, and then just a real connection with nature. That's where I feel the most at home, and is in the outdoors. I think a lot of geotechnical engineers might also feel that way. That's why we became geotechnical engineers, right? We feel a connection to the earth, to the soil, to being out behind a drill rig. We don't necessarily want to be in the office all day. We want to go out and be in nature, be in the field.
That's cool. I'm thinking about it right now, and you're right. There's a checklist, and then there's a checklist, and then you cross things off the list, and it's the checklist. So, I mean, when you start, you know, you finish undergrad, you know, you have grad school in a few months, and you say, I'm gonna start on the trail. I mean, do you have like a point that you have to hit, and then you turn around? Like, what's the thought process there for the schedule? Because you want to have freedom, but what's the thought process for when you're planning for something like that?
Right. So this is a funny story. The engineer in me said, okay, this trail, Appalachian Trail, it goes from Georgia to Maine. It's 2,200 miles. I know that I have 100 days to do it. And so I said, that math's real easy. I'm just going to do 22 miles a day.
There you go.
It'll work out just fine. And I had written out on an Excel spreadsheet that I was carrying with me, you know, exactly what mile markers and what shelters I needed to hit.
Okay.
And so for the first day, I think I got 10 miles. The second day, I was like, I'm going to wake up early and make up those miles. There was no way. And so you just realize that you have to be flexible, right? You know, the terrain is going to affect your mileage some days. The weather's going to affect your mileage someday. Your mood is going to affect your miles some days. So some days you take what's called a 0 day, right? You just don't hike any miles. You need to let your body heal. You need to let your mind relax. You just stay in camp and just enjoy where you are. And then my longest day on the Appalachian Trail to make up for some of those 0 days was 35 miles.
Wow.
You know, so you just realize that you've got to be flexible. You know what the end goal is, right? You know, hey, I've got to get to Maine. And so you just put the work in as hard as you can every day. You know, and I knew that I was going to be happy with myself, even if I didn't make it, so long as I gave it 100%.
That's great. And did you end up doing it by yourself, or you went with some folks?
So most of these trails, I end up starting solo, but you meet other people who are also on this same journey, and you might hike with them for a day or two, or a week or longer. Just depends on if their pace matches yours, or they might have some family visiting them when you get to a town, or want to stay in a town longer than you do. So you just sort of pass in and out of these groups of people. And it's a great way to meet people. You bond with them really quickly because there's no cell phones out there. There's no TV shows out there. You know, if you're having a conversation with someone, you're in that conversation wholly.
Nice.
Very present. There's no way to just sort of zone out and, all of a sudden now I'm playing on my phone and not really listening to what you're having to say.
Yeah.
So you become friends with these people really quickly. But one of the most interesting things is when you're out on the trail, you don't go by your real name. Most people adopt a nickname or a trail name.
Okay.
This is something that is just sort of given to you by the other hikers around you, typically describing a personality trait or something about you. So my trail name is Diesel. That's because I hike like a diesel engine. When I wake up in the morning, I put my head down and I just go all day. I'm not necessarily the fastest hiker out there, but I hike at a slow, steady pace, and I just don't stop until the sun goes down.
That's so cool.
So you meet all of these people, and they just sort of become legends in your mind because you never know their real name. You just know their trail name.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious, discoveries, when you think about what you experienced and now, and then you went back to grad school, right? And now you're working as a geotech. How do you apply some of these things you learned? I don't know if you have trail names for the folks that you lead in your office, but yeah, how do you apply some of this?
So the biggest lessons that you can take away from this trail are just endurance and perseverance and hard work. It's not easy to wake up every morning and hike 20 miles. Your muscles get sore, your feet get tired. When you're 1,000 miles in and still have 1,000 miles to go, it's hard to envision that end goal. You just sort of feel stuck, like in the middle of the project. Maybe you're at 60% designs and you just keep getting changes back from your client. You're like, oh my gosh, we're never going to finish this. But you learn that perseverance to just keep going, to keep pushing through to the end. That's got to be the biggest lesson that I can take away from these through hikes and apply is endurance and perseverance.
Yeah. And where do you find the motivation when you have a zero sum, or I say zero sum, but you get a 0 day and another 0 day after that? I mean, what's the motivation? Is it we got to finish? We promised people we're going to make it. Like what motivates you on the down days?
Every day is different. You can be down in the dumps on the trail for many different reasons. But usually all it takes is a 5-minute look around you, just sort of take a panoramic look for 5 minutes and realize how fortunate you are, to have such beauty around you. And some people listening to this might object, but the most recent trail that I was on was the Continental Divide Trail, which had almost 800 miles through New Mexico.
Wow.
I thought New Mexico was not particularly beautiful. So if anyone's in New Mexico and listening to this podcast, I'm sorry, but at least the hiking on the CDT through your state, it sucked. So, there in New Mexico, it was harder to use the beauty around you as motivation.
Okay.
In New Mexico, at least for me personally, my motivation was just survival. The next water source is 40 miles away. So if I want to take a drink anytime soon, I better get to moving.
Wow.
If you are in a group, hiking with a group, hey, I promised these other hikers that I'm going to be at camp with them tonight. And so, it feels good to be welcomed into a camp. If they're already there and have some tents set up or maybe a little campfire going, it's always nice to see some friends at the end of the day.
That's really cool.
There's all these different things that can motivate you. But like I said, I try to just use the natural beauty around me.
Yeah. No, I love it.
Motivation.
I love it. You think about times that you're in the field and you're at a construction site and, it's, I don't know, 6:45 a.m. Rig hasn't started yet. You got water in your boot, right? And it's like, I got water in my boot. It's the beginning of the day. What am I going to do? Right. I hate my life, but, try to find something to get you through. It's super helpful. And in those groups, did you find that you were the diesel engine, or you like the leader some days and other days you were like, I need you guys to pick me up? I mean, how did that work out? The dynamics there?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a dynamic situation. Some people come to the trail and they're really fit.
Okay.
and they're really in shape. And then other people are still sort of getting what's called their trail legs.
Okay.
When you hike 20 miles a day, you lose a lot of weight. Your legs get very thick and muscular.
Mhm.
And so once you sort of hit that peak fitness, then it's called having your trail legs. You've got your trail legs, you're an efficient hiker. Um, so early on, the people who have trained really hard for this hike are leading. And then sometimes they burn out too quickly, right? They push too hard too early. And so then it's the tortoise and the hare situation. The tortoises, end up being the ones leading later on. But it just changes, and everybody's mood is different every day, and so you might be a leader today and a follower tomorrow.
Got it. Got it. And then do you find that I mean, you're an engineer, right? So are you walking around with like a ton of different maps, a brunt and compass, are you like mapping outcrops while you're there? I'm curious, are you just focused on the trail?
Um, when you're backpacking, you're trying to be as lightweight with your gear as possible.
Okay.
So I didn't actually even carry a compass or paper maps. I
Wow.
used some apps on my cell phone, which doubled as my camera
Okay.
for navigation. But I would definitely sort of show my geotechnical engineering side. We'd hike up on a rock outcrop
Uh-huh.
and say, "Oh man, look at those bedding planes," or "Oh, I can tell you that that's definitely some volcanic rock," or different things like that. So I'm definitely pointing out things to my fellow hikers, and they just sort of roll their eyes. They're like, "Oh, geez, we don't really care about that stuff." But I've got so many pictures of random bedding planes,
Yep.
and all these different rock outcrops that we would hike past. So
I love it. It's the things that we appreciate, whether you're in a metropolitan area, big city, and you're walking by the construction fence, you're like, look, that's a caisson rig, right? Or if you're
yeah,
in a trail, it's like we're always the ones that are kind of off to the side, looking at something that seems random, but it's really exciting to us.
exactly.
That is great. Well, I'll say that I guess you would say this is a leave of absence. Took a leave of absence to do these trails between undergraduate work and grad work. And I assume that was for the work-life balance. Is that safe to say, or?
Right. So the company that I hired on with right out of college,
Mhm.
um, since they were such a small company, they were flexible enough to where they just didn't hire me full time
Hmm.
until I completed my second trail. That's the Pacific Crest Trail.
Okay.
So that's out on the West Coast. That's California, Oregon, and Washington.
Okay.
So instead of being hired on in May when I graduated, I just hired on in September when I came back.
Mhm.
So these three trails that we're talking about today are part of what's called the Triple Crown of hiking. So it's the Appalachian Trail on the East Coast, the Pacific Crest Trail on the West Coast, and then the Continental Divide Trail, which runs the spine of the Rockies. And so I had completed those other two hikes right around college, and I knew that I had two main goals after I had completed those and had graduated college. One was to earn my PE, and then the other one was to finish this Triple Crown, which would mean that I'd need to hike the Continental Divide Trail. So when I hired on at Stantec, in my interview process with them, I just explained the situation. I said, "Hey, look, you guys are a great company. I really want to come to work for you, but here's the deal.
Oh.
In 4 years, after I've had my 4 years experience as an EIT, and once I take the test and once I earn my PE, I'm celebrating. I'm taking off and I'm going to go hike the CDT. And you guys, hopefully after me being with you for 4 years and building that relationship, we can find a workaround.
Yeah.
But this trail means so much to me that if I've got to quit and come back to you later, I'll do it."
Wow.
So I ended up leaving Stantec before this trail, but I did the same thing with wood. I was going to hike the Continental Divide Trail in 2020.
Mhm.
However, the Trail Coalition asked everyone not to hike. They didn't want COVID being spread along the trail.
Mhm.
So that got pushed. So I started this hike in May of this year,
Mhm.
but I had just started with wood in January.
Wow.
So that was a little bit of an awkward situation. Hey, I'm going to come work for you for 4 or 5 months, and then I'm going to be gone for 6. But I think if people are looking for work-life balance, it's important to be upfront. You know, before I even accepted an interview for this job, I explained the situation. I said, you know, I'll respect you more if you tell me that you can't, you know, handle this. I'll call you in the fall when I get back. You know, but they were familiar with leaves of absences. They said, you know, hey, we've got this great policy. I think that your situation applies. And so I think employers really just appreciate honesty and being upfront and giving as much notice as you can. Really, most of these policies, including Stantec's and Wood's, really are meant for like extreme personal situations. You know, if you've got a family member that, you know, is in a car accident and needs, you know, care, or an extreme bereavement situation, you know, but these companies, they're flexible enough to let me use them for an adventure.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the reality is that a lot of times people don't think that they can even ask something. So sometimes somebody will just quit. You're right. And it's like, you don't even have that conversation of, this is what I'm planning. Want to see if there's a way that we could both win. You know, did I stay on as an employee, that I have this experience that's going to enrich my life and allow me to bring my whole self to work. So those conversations are important. And again, as a leader, I'm sure you'd be more than welcome to have a staff, you know, say something like that to you. So you're setting a great example. You're setting a great example. And hopefully folks that are listening in are seeing that you can have your career and you can still have that work-life balance. But what I always tell people is that we don't read minds, or at least I haven't figured out how to read minds. So I don't know what it is you want unless you say something. And then somebody can say no. They can say we can't honor that, right? But at least you know.
Yeah.
Man. How do you think it benefited your career? You took this time off. You've had these great experiences. How did it impact your career?
I think the biggest thing that it saved me from is burnout.
Wow.
If you're traveling as much as I was with Stantec, if you're behind the rig as much as I have been in my career, you know, when you're behind a rig, you're not working a 40-hour work week. If you're out in the field and you're out in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you know, almost 1,000 miles away from your home office, you know, you're putting in 70 or 80 hours a week. And that'll really burn you out quickly, no matter how much you love your career. And I love being a geotechnical engineer, you know, but just that amount of hours burns you out. Or even if you're in the office only working 40 hours a week, but you've got a really demanding client, that can burn you out just as quickly as well. So taking these really long stretches away from the office and just sort of being able to calm myself, reset, and then come back to the office, you know, missing work. You know, if you want, it's great to take a 1-week vacation, and I think that that's what the majority of people do. But think about it, right? You're stressing beforehand because you're trying to tie up all these loose ends and say, you know, hey, if you need me while I'm gone, you know, call this person instead, or email this person. Maybe you're checking your email while you're on your vacation. That's not very relaxing. And then when you get back, you've missed a week of work. So you're trying to play catch up. So yes, you've taken a week off of work, but it's not really very relaxing. And taking these longer vacations, these longer leaves, and you really do fully relax. You just sort of let work fade away, shift your priorities to the trail or whatever you might be working on or whatever you might be doing. And then you can come back to work totally refreshed. And I think that makes you a much better employee.
That's really cool. Have you seen other people taking a similar approach, or you're kind of the only one at this point in your circles?
In my circles, I'm the only one crazy enough to do these big long hikes. You know, I know other people will sort of try to stack their vacations and take big long vacations. And then other people, you know, just take every Friday off and use their vacation up that way. So I think it all depends on what works for you. But for me, these longer vacations, more spread apart, is what's better for me in my work-life balance.
That's cool. And just to clarify, when you say behind the rig, are you talking about logging borings, or are you talking about operating like a rig to push cones or something like that?
No, I never operated a rig,
Mhm.
but I was logging samples, split spoons,
Yep.
Shelby tubes, rock core.
Got it. So some people would argue that, you know, a 10-hour day logging borings is less demanding than 20 to 30 hours, 20 to 30 miles, you know, per day on a trail. So
Right, right. Well, they're just taxing in different ways.
yeah.
Um, Hiking 30 miles a day is very physically taxing,
Mhm.
but you can just sort of. I find hiking to be meditative, right? It's very repetitive,
Yeah.
one foot right in front of the other, and
Yep.
so you just can sort of fall into this meditative trance and just let your mind just go wherever it needs to go that day.
Nice.
Let your body do the work.
Yeah.
But when you're behind the lit rig and you're, oh, is this clay, sand, silt? What's its consistency? What's its, blow count? That's very mentally taxing. Your body might not be tired, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Unless you're helping the drillers carry their augers and carry their core barrels and everything. But
Yeah.
so it's taxing just in different ways.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it, Will. Final piece of advice. What would you share with engineers that may be pursuing a career similar to yours? So you can look at that from standpoint of your career advancement or even work-life balance. Like somebody's here's something here. What would you advise them? Or what would you give them as a little nugget?
I think the best piece of advice that I've ever gotten, and so I'm just going to continue to pass this piece of advice on,
Yes.
is how important your engineering judgment is.
Hmm.
One of the most frustrating things to me early on in my career is that I felt like the coursework that we had in geotechnical classes wasn't necessarily lining up with what I was seeing in the field.
Hmm.
It was a lot more. True geotechnical consulting is a lot more engineering judgment based
Mhm.
than it is formula based, right? And that's
Mhm.
why experience in the field is so important. But early on in my career, I was on a job site doing some drilling, taking some core samples, and I didn't have cell signal. I was seeing things in these borings that weren't consistent with what was being mapped in that area. And so I had to make a judgment call to do more borings, to shift the program. I didn't have cell signal to call my boss to try to figure out what was going on. He ended up disagreeing with my decision to do more borings, right? Because that increased our drilling subcontractor bill, and then of course affected our budget. But he did appreciate my engineering judgment, right? I made a decision and I stuck with it, and he said that was the most important lesson that I could learn that day.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's the best piece of advice that I can give someone, especially early on in your career. You might not have the right answer, but it's important to use your engineering critical thinking to make a decision and to stand by it. It might be the wrong decision, but your peers, your employees, your bosses are going to respect that you thought critically about the situation, made the best decision with the data that you had, and you're standing by it, you're defending it. Don't be wishy-washy. Don't say, oh, well, this or that. Stand by your decision. It's not going to be the end of the world if it's the wrong decision. Okay, our drilling bill was $500 higher for the 2 extra borings that I took. $500 is not the end of the world. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
But I learned so much that day. So really focus on your engineering judgment. That's not something that they can teach you in the classroom. They can teach you formulas. They can teach you, proper drilling techniques, but they can't teach you engineering judgment. So really just try to take that and develop your engineering judgment and stand by your decisions.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So I think it's a good place to take a pause, Will. We're going to come back in just a moment and close this one out with our career factor safety end segment. Stick around. All right, welcome back. It's time for our career factor safety end segment. In geotechnical engineering, just like many disciplines of engineering, it's important to incorporate a factor of safety into your design. But what about incorporating a factor of safety into your career? So today, of course, we're speaking with William Modrall. Will, you've already had a successful career. And when you look back at that career, What's one thing you implement in your career to give yourself what we'll call a factor of safety in your career?
I think the biggest factor of safety in my career that has helped me advance as quickly in my career as I have is to always try to be the hardest working person in the room.
Hmm.
You're never going to be the smartest person in the room. There's always going to be someone who has more experience, who has gone to another training, who just is even just a little bit smarter than you, right? I think it's a bad attitude to go into a room thinking that you can be the smartest person in that room. I think you're going to have a lot of attitude problems and a lot of issues if you walk into a room thinking that you're going to be the smartest person. But you can always be the hardest working person, right? You can always give 120%, and people respect that. They note that. They might not give you a pat on the back every day, but when it comes time to your end of year review or time for promotion, your bosses, everyone recognizes that you're the hardest working person there. And so I think that that's the best factor of safety that I can offer. And that'll really help you in your career, is always just try to work really hard and give 120%.
I love it. That's powerful. I'm thinking about the name Diesel, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. The diesel engine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, Will, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for sharing all the great insights you shared. A lot of information here, and I'm sure this advice will be helpful for our listeners. Now, if a listener is listening or watching and wants to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to get you? Are you on social media, or you have an email you want to share?
Sure. The best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm always on there reading articles, posting articles, and developing relationships with my peers. So I think LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of me.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This is really great.
All right. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed the episode today. We would love to hear your feedback, comments, and/or questions. Please feel free to go to geotechnicalengineeringpodcast.com, where you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, that being episode 33, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during this episode. Until next time, we wish you the very best in all your geotechnical engineering endeavors. Peace.